All right, we are in the book of Genesis, have been for a while. Just to let you know, I skipped chapter 20. That's very unusual for me, but we have pretty much already discussed every theme in that chapter because once again, um, Abraham and Sarah lie about their relationship, and she says, I'm his sister, and he says, yeah, that's my sister, and they get in all kinds of trouble. We've already talked about that before, so we're going to move on to chapter 21 to have a little bit of new material. One comment, it is interesting that sins seem to be repetitive in nature. So when you see that Abraham did it once, now he turns around and he'll do it again. But the other thing, if you continue to read on in the Old Testament, is that you'll find that not only him, but his predecessors will, is that right? No, that's the coming before. His heritage will do some similar things with a descendants. Yes, thank you. I knew a predecessor is like before. So anyway, just one bit of commentary on that particular chapter. So we're going to go to chapter 21 and see here, and it kind of continues on with the theme that we've been on for a while. Anyway, chapter 20 kind of interrupts the whole theme in a way. But we're going to talk about God finally fulfilling the promise to Abraham and Sarah that they have a child. So we're going to read verse 1 and then go from there. It says, and the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. Isn't that good? He's faithful, right? And the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. So God was faithful to his promise. I mean, knows that God never fails. God doesn't speak something and not do it. So the promise of a son was fulfilled, and that was necessary for his, if you will, his name, for Abraham's lineage to continue on. And God had promised that through that lineage, he had blessed the whole world. As we know, Christ will come from that lineage. So very interesting as we look at that God's faithful to his word. And, you know, when you look at the promises of God, they kind of come in two types. One type is unconditional. Doesn't matter what you do, God said it, he's going to do it. Another type of promise is conditional. And we see those throughout the Bible as well. If you will obey my commandments and do this and do that, then I will bless you, right? So those are conditional and unconditional promises that we see that God does. Now, by the way, anybody know, this is an approximation, approximately how many years did it take for this promise to come to pass? From the time God spoke it to the time he caused it to come into effect. No, not 84 years. How about 25? Yes. So it was 25 years from the time God spoke to Abraham and Sarah. Excuse me. Got a little bit of allergy stuff going on. So 25 years, that's a long time. Let's just be honest. How many of us would have been discouraged, thought, well, maybe I heard it wrong? But throughout it, we know that God continued to repeat this blessing and this promise that he was going to give Abraham and Sarah a child. So 25 years, that's a long time. So, but God was faithful. Let's read verses 2 through 7. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. I mean, remember that God actually told them to name him that, right? Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. So let's talk about this. Very, very unique. Obviously, a miracle that God would cause an old couple like this, both of them, to return the time of life, as we talked about before, so that they would have a child. Abraham was 100, and Sarah was around 90, is what is estimated. So very interesting, and even the story kind of makes you smile, especially when they talk about Isaac being born and God's made me laugh. I mean, his name actually means laughter. So a very interesting portion of Scripture here. And it's interesting that when God told them to name Isaac his name, Isaac, it was that God was actually kind of rebuking Sarah for laughing. But now that rebuke has turned into an answered promise of God, and it's a blessing. And she's actually going to nurse this child, and God is returned that time of life to her and to Abraham that they could have a child, a son. One of the things that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on is that Isaac is a type, a symbol, if you will. In other words, some of the things about him remind us of some things about Christ. So he is a type of Christ. Now, I don't mean that he has redemption power. I mean that his life and his coming to be is symbolic and kind of speaks forward of Christ in a way. So some of those things is they were both a specially promised son, right? Remember, the angel came to Mary and said, you're going to have a son, and this is how it's going to happen, and also came to Abraham and Sarah. So they were both had specially promised sons. Both conceptions were miraculous. Now, you can't really compare the miraculous conception of Christ to that of Isaac, because the Holy Spirit was involved in the conception of Christ, right? But they're both miraculous, right? So that's what that we can say. Both mothers were given assurance by God, who is omnipotent. And when you look at both mothers, when you look at Mary and you look at, excuse me, and you look at Sarah, both had questions, right? How can this be? And some laughed, Sarah laughed. Mary was kind of questioning, not in a negative way, but how can this be? I haven't been with a man, all those kinds of things. So God, in his omnipotence, tells them about them that they're going to have a son. Both of their names were rich in meaning before they were ever born. By the way, what does Jesus' name mean? God with us, right? You shall call him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sin, right? So, and then Isaac, his very name means laughter, which speaks about the impossibility to man to have a child, but yet nothing is impossible with God, right? So it's interesting as we look at these, just a little bit of comparison here. Both births occurred at an appointed time. When the angel spoke to Mary, he said, at this time, this is going to happen. You're going to, the Holy Spirit's going to overshadow you, all these things, and you're going to have a child. As a matter of fact, whenever the angel is telling Mary about Jesus is going to come into being, he says, your uh, cousin, is that right? Yeah. Elizabeth is already in her 6th month, and that was also a miraculous conception. So, very interesting. I mean, God has appointed times, right? He does things in His time, not in ours. Lord, don't bless me with a child at 100. I really don't want that. But God has appointed times, right? And so, interesting. Both births were accompanied by great joy. So, both of those are interesting as we look and compare those. Let's read verses 8 through 11. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. Now, you know Abraham is going to celebrate. I mean, he's been waiting a long time for this promise to come to pass. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son. Now, when we look at this, it's going to seem very harsh. And we kind of wonder, is God really in her telling Abraham to do it? So it's interesting as we follow along in the story. For the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. And the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's sight because of his son. So Isaac was growing, and whenever he was weaned, it says that Abraham made a great feast and began to, all this began to happen. So Isaac would have been, in those days, they probably would, at the most, would have weaned a child at 3 at the latest. So that would put Isaac at probably 2 to 3, and it would put Ishmael at probably 12 to 13, 14 years old, somewhere in there. So there was some years there. Here in this commentary, it estimated about 13 years apart. So the child grew and was weaned, and Sarah sees the son. The son's old enough that he is scoffing at what is happening, that they're celebrating this. I don't know why this Ishmael is scoffing at this. I don't understand what's going on necessarily, but it offends Abraham. It offends Sarah in particular. So she tells him to cast Hagar out. Now, we can understand why Abraham was upset by this kind of stand that Sarah took, because it was his flesh and blood, right? It wasn't Sarah's, but it was his. And so we'll see, and God's already made a promise that, he's going to bless Ishmael as well as Isaac. So Abraham's probably saying, I'm not sure that we're supposed to do this, but we'll find out that God will speak to him about it. So Abraham would have found it hard to agree with her at this particular time. But he also wants his house to be happy. So let's look at verses 12 through 14. But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice. For in Isaac your seed shall be called. That's in your questions, by the way. Yet I will also make a nation of the son of the bondwoman, because he is your seed. Continue to read. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water, and putting it on her shoulder, he gave it And he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So you have to realize they're in the wilderness. To me, it seems, do you agree? It seems kind of harsh. Here's a bottle of water. See you later, right? Especially that it's Abraham's son, right? But I believe that Sarah didn't really understand what she was speaking, but what she said was true, because she said, this son of the bondwoman will not be heir with my son. And so there is a difference delineated by God, that even though Ishmael is a direct descendant of Abraham, that the lineage that God promised to Sarah and Abraham would come through Isaac, would not be traced through Ishmael. So she actually almost prophesied in a way when she said that. So imagine the trust that you'd have to have if you're Abraham to send them off on their own. The trust that God would take care of them. The trust that God would still bless them because he's promised to do so, but yet you're sending them off. So it's God is again testing Abraham's faith. Of course, we know Abraham is true to the Lord, and he trusts the Lord. So that process begins to happen. He sends her away, and it solves the problem in their house, but there's some things that need to be taken care of. So she wandered. Here's Hagar wandering in the wilderness in Beersheba. I may have heard the name Beersheba, right? It's mentioned many, many times after this in the Bible. So she wanders in the wilderness. Excuse me. Allergies are rough tonight. And they begin to run out of water. And she is concerned that she's going to die and the child's going to die. Now, when you first read this, when you don't think about the age difference between them, you might think that who she is protecting is a little child, but he's not. He's a teenager, right? So it's interesting. It kind of plays out different than what we would imagine if we were writing the story. So he gives her some bread, a skin of water, and tells her that she is to go. Let's read verses 15 through 18. This is kind of a lengthy chapter. And the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. It almost sounds like he's a child, but he's not. But she doesn't want to watch him die. We can understand that, right? And you would, in the wilderness, you would die quickly. You'd dehydrate and die. Then she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot, for she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. So they had traveled for a little while out in the wilderness. They run out of supplies, no bread, no water. They're sitting under the shrub to stay out of the heat because it's hot. It's desert land. And God, whenever Hagar begins to cry out to him and begins to pray, then God, it says that it's interesting. It says that God heard the voice of the lad. It doesn't say he heard Hagar, but he heard the voice of the lad, which is interesting to me because Hagar was actually crying and lifting up her voice. And God tells them, don't fear, because I've heard the voice of the lad, and that he was going to bless him. I'll make a great nation of him. Does anybody know what nation that this is? It's the Arabs, right? It's all of the Arab nations. So God is going to make his descendants to be great. All of the Arabic people will come from this particular lineage. We'll go ahead and move on. Verses 19 through 21. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. Isn't that interesting? I underlined that because Hagar puts the child, it says, about a bow's length away, but then he ends up becoming an archer. Just a lot of symbolism here whenever you look at it. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So we don't know. It's interesting to me. We don't know where the well of water came from because she's been wondering and she didn't ever find it. Was it miraculous, or was it that just God opened up her eyes and she finally saw it? Now, in the wilderness, you could travel away and not see water. It's sunshiny, it's deserty, all those kinds of things. So she could have missed it, or God could have just miraculously put that there for a supply for her. God was there to take care of them, protect them, keep them, like he does us. Let's read verses 22 through 24. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech, now Abimelech is in chapter 20. He's the one that Abraham lied to and Sarah lied to say that she's my sister, right? So that's where the Abimelech here comes in. And Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? That'd be great if people could say that of us, wouldn't it? God's with you in all you do. If you can see the hand of God upon somebody's life, that would be a wonderful statement. And I believe Abraham was so blessed that it was hard to miss that he was that blessed. So God's with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring, or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me and to the land in which you have dwelt. And Abraham said, I will swear. So Abimelech is making a treaty with Abraham. Interesting. I think it's a good deal for Abimelech, right? Because he knows how powerful Abraham is and how many men he has, how many supplies he has, how God's hand is with him. So Abimelech is here, and he's making a treaty with him. And so to protect himself, and he knows that if Abraham will agree to it, that Abraham, there's no doubt about his integrity. If Abraham said something, that he would do it, right? So that's why, and they're trying to protect their assets, trying to protect themselves, just in case something came up between their men, between their workers and all of that. Charles Spurgeon made a comment about Abimelech saying, God is with you in all that you do. He said, I think the greatest blessing that God ever gives to a man is to have his presence. Isn't that good? That's the greatest blessing that we could ever have, is to have his presence. He said, I should choose as my highest honor to have God always with me. Isn't it interesting, even in this story, that we have some application to our lives, that We want to be so close in our relationship with the Lord that even people who don't understand the Lord will see that God's hand is on us, that God's blessed us, that God is with us. And so that is a tremendous thing. Uh, and Abraham agrees to do that. All right, let's read verses 25 through 31. I'll probably finish up early. Not a tremendous amount of things in here, but every time I say that, then we get talking and we won't be early. So that's all right. Then Abraham rebuked Abimelech. Now, what's going on here? Something has changed, right? Because of a well of water which Abimelech's servant had seized. And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, nor had I heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. So there not only has, I keep wanting to call him Moses tonight for some reason, not only has Abraham made this covenant that he's going to treat Abimelech correctly and not do anything to harm him, but now they're making a covenant together so that the relationships between them and their men are going to be good. So they're making this covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. Then Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs, which you have set by themselves? And he said, you will take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, that they may be a witness that I have dug this well. Therefore he called that place Beersheba, because the two of them had sworn oath there. Number one, we don't understand the importance of having a well in that area. To have a place to be able to get water was a tremendous blessing. I've been near this area, and it looks like desert everywhere. And so to be able to have a place that you could have a well to draw water, to be able to have, and they're nomadic, right? So they know that at least they have water here at Beersheba. They can water their flocks, and as they move along, they're going to know that they at least have this source of water. So very important. It's a strategic property that he has there, and Abimelech agrees to this because he doesn't really have a choice, honestly. Abraham is more powerful. That's why he came to him in the first place, and he's blessed by God. And then, of course, the sheep and the oxen are probably going to be sacrificed because they typically cut a covenant, as we've talked about before. And when Abimelech accepts the 7 lambs, then it's the same as sticking out your hand and agreeing with someone that you're going to make this covenant and keep it. Beersheba means watering place, well of underground water. Abraham's son Isaac dug the well again later on, and he built an altar in Beersheba. So Beersheba is mentioned several times in Genesis, but also in Joshua and again in Samuel. I actually preached a message one time about Daddy dug a well, and Isaac had to come back and redig it. I mean, sometimes we want to pass things on to our heritage, but that's not the way that the kingdom works always. And so Isaac had to come back. They had filled in the well. He comes back later on, and that's just kind of precursor. We'll see that in chapter 26. But that place is important. It's a promise that and a great territory that he has in his allotment of land. So, as a matter of fact, whenever the children of Israel come into the promised land, which will be hundreds and hundreds of years later, the phrase that they use to measure the promised land is they say is it will go from Dan to Beersheba. Dan is the northern border, northern tip, and Beersheba is the southern. So it's important that Abraham keep this and it be a property that Israel will, when they go into the promised land, that they will inherit. All right. Verses 32 through 34. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. So Abimelech rose with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines many days. So how many knows what the land of the Philistines is? That's where the giants were, right? Whenever they come into the land. So it's important. And Abraham, you probably could easily miss this, but he plants a tree there, and it's a tree that would take a long time to grow. It's not a quick growing tree like a pine tree would be around here, but this is a tree that would take years and years and decades to grow, and what it speaks of is that Abraham believes the promise of God for the land, right? So it is a statement of faith. He's, for lack of a better word, he's sticking a stake in the ground. He's sticking a tree in the ground to mark that God has said that this is going to be part of his legacy of his children would inherit this area. So he calls on the name of the everlasting God. So he stays faithful to God. He stays where God has called him to be, and he doesn't let problems and issues push him away from the promise. How many knows that we have to work? We need to worry about that, right? If God promises us something, we need to stick with it. Don't run away whenever problems arise. Don't move. Don't leave. Don't forsake the promise, but stay with it because God has promised it, and it's a statement of faith on our behalf. So if God's ever promised you something, put a marker in the ground and believe the Lord for it. Amen? All right. I did finish early, but that's okay. Let's look at these questions. How long did Abraham and Sarah wait for the promise to be fulfilled? 25 years. Number 2, how old was Abraham when Isaac was born? 100 years old. He's got you by a few, Bill. Name 2 ways Isaac was a type or picture of the Messiah. I named a bunch. I don't know what you wrote down, but you can tell me. What's one you wrote down? Especially promised son. What else? Okay. Anybody else write anything different from those? Conceptions were miraculous, right? For appointed time. Good. Good. So there was a bunch. So I just asked to name a couple of those. Question number 4, and I have the verse listed there, verse 10. What did Sarah tell Abraham to do to Hagar and Ishmael? Cast them out, both of them, the bondwoman and her son. At verse 12 through 13, what did God tell Abraham about Isaac and Ishmael? Isaac's the man. That's one way to say it in modern day terminology. He's the promised child, right? What about Ishmael? So he's going to have a blessing, and his seed is going to be like a nation as well, right? Verse 19. How did God provide for Hagar and Ishmael? Opened her eyes so she could see the well of water. That's right. According to verse 22, and I think really this is the central theme of this chapter, because it tells us so much about God, but it also tells us about God's relationship with Abraham and Abraham's faithfulness to God and God's faithfulness to Abraham. According to verse 22, what notable thing did Abimelech say about Abraham? God's with you in all that you do. All right. Verse 25. Why did Abraham rebuke Abimelech? Over a well of water that Abimelech's servants had stolen or seized, however you. Yeah. And then final question, according to verse 27, how did Abraham and Abimelech work out the situation? They cut a covenant. That's right. You don't have to get into all the details of how many lambs and all that, but they cut a covenant and come to an agreement together.